Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. This month we'll be talking about how to make the most out of Tenstreets Networks, IntelliApp, Driver Pulse, and Xchange. The number of people and companies who use these three networks grows every day, which means your company runs more efficiently every day too. Today we want to show you how you can use the power behind these networks to make the best decisions for your business's success. And a little later on, we'll also be showing you some interesting trends in driver data that we've collected over the past 12 years. So you'll want to stay tuned for that. My name is Leah Kelly. Thanks for joining us today. One of the most exciting parts about today's webinar also is that all this valuable insight is going to be presented by our CEO, Tim Crawford. He's going to lead the way here, but before I turn it over to him, I have just a few housekeeping items to cover first. So please know that the webinar will be recorded and sent to you afterwards. So if you get interrupted for any reason or you'd like to review it later or share it with somebody else at your office, that's all great. You can expect to receive a recording of today's webinar within the next 24 hours. Also, you can submit your questions anytime throughout the presentation. Please feel free to do that. You can do so using the text box under your questions panel in the GoToWebinar panel, under your questions section in the GoToWebinar panel. So if for some reason we're not able to get to them right away, we'll get to them at the end of the webinar, so you'll get them answered one way or the other. And that's all I have. So Tim, whenever you're ready.
Great, thanks. Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and let me extend my thanks as well. I appreciate you spending part of your afternoon with us, and really hope the next half hour, 45 minutes is helpful. I'd echo what Leah just said. If you have questions, comments, or any feedback, make sure you send those through, and we're happy to address as many of those as time permits today. Like Leah said, what we're going to talk about today is some of the network effects that the Tenstreet platform brings to you guys, and make sure that you know what they are and you know how they interact with the rest of your business. So as you're thinking about how to continue to improve the way your company runs, you can get the most out of it. And so with that said, let me sort of dive in here. And so what do I mean about get the most out of Tenstreet Networks? And when I was in high school science, middle school science, one of the few things that I recall from that is this idea about how two different wavelengths can either help each other out or interfere with each other. So the diagram here on the left, the idea of constructive interference. Hey, if you want to make something louder, the two waves, the red and the blue, they're in sync, right? So the resulting wave is much bigger, right? As the diagram on the right, the red wave and the blue wave are out of sync, and they effectively just cancel each other out. If we as Tenstreet don't do a good job explaining to you guys, hey, look, these are the way the platform's working and the way the platform has changed over time, right? And the network effects have gotten bigger. The risk you run is that you could be making business decisions that are more on the right than on the left. So hopefully by the end of this conversation, you guys will have a sense for, oh, here's the things that are happening on the platform and how you can make decisions in terms of how you optimize your operations to get the most out of the platform and get the most juice out of it and not make changes kind of in a vacuum where things are working against each other. Right? So that's where we're going to go. And there's three big effects and then some driver marketing data we're going to talk about today. Okay, jumping in. The first one, IntelliApp. IntelliApp, as hopefully everybody knows, gives your drivers the ability to apply online, and a really high percentage of the time apply with a pre-populated application. Just recently, over the past 2 or 3 weeks, we rolled out a new version of the IntelliApp that really updates the look and feel and how it operates for drivers. But that said, well, I'll get into that in a minute. Okay. So what does that mean, the ability to pre-population? Well, the first thing it means is that we're able to get applications from wherever we have people. This map shows us a density of applications for a representative month over the last 30 days. purple dot is every zip code where we've received an application. The green pins are where we have received more than 500 applications, 500 IntelliApps in that month period. So the big takeaway on this slide is essentially, hey, where drivers have density, where there's density of population, we're able to catch applications, and that's where we're getting them from. So the good news is if you're recruiting drivers basically to the east of the Mississippi, it's a more target-rich environment. If you're on the West Coast, you're going to have to be a lot more targeted in terms of where you're looking for people. Well, that's probably not telling you guys something that you didn't already know. I mentioned app prepopulation a few minutes ago. And what does that mean exactly? Okay, so what this chart shows is the average completion time for all candidates. How long is it taking them to submit a full-blown application? Less than 5 minutes, 5 to 15 minutes, 15 to 30, 30 to 45, and so on. And obviously, the shorter the application time, right, the less time you're asking for a driver, the higher the conversion rate's going to be, right? So this chart shows the average across all candidates. Obviously, not all candidates are the same, though. Some are known to the system. This is the prepopulation I mentioned a few minutes ago. This is what that same chart looks like for known candidates. The bulk of, 40+% of them are doing that full IntelliApp, full DOT application in 5 to 15 minutes and sort of trailing off from there. And depending on your application pool, this is what this looks like for 80–85% of the experienced drivers in the market. If you're looking at a less experienced pool, you're a carrier that hires a lot of students, hey, that percentage could be 50 to 60%, right? What about the guys that the system doesn't recognize when they come in? Well, this is what the completion rates look like, right? You can see it shifts pretty drastically to the right, to the slower end of the spectrum, right? So if you think back to the last time you went to the eye doctor, sort of better one, right, or better two, which one would we rather have, right? Obviously, we're trying really hard to make sure more people look like this graph with the known candidates than this graph here with the unknown candidates, right? All that completion time stuff, right? What does it mean practically, right? It does a couple of things. The biggest thing is it drives a huge amount of our mobile usage, right? If you're able to get through a full application in just a few minutes, you're going to be a lot more likely to complete it on a mobile device. So what this chart is showing us is the percentage of IntelliApps that were completed over the last 18 months or so on a mobile device. And you can see, in the month of August and September, it's about 72%. One of the big takeaways here is that the trajectory of this graph didn't really change with the introduction of that new upgrade that I mentioned at the beginning of this section. Right? We're thrilled about the upgrade. We think the IntelliApp looks really, really good. But the fundamentals are we're getting 72% of our apps, via a mobile device even before that. For those of you who are curious, this breaks down to overwhelmingly Android over iPhone, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, Android to iPhone, and overwhelmingly small screen to big screen. So overwhelmingly a cell phone as opposed to a tablet, right? And so those are important things to keep in mind in terms of when you're designing, whether it's an email template or a landing page, et cetera. Those are the devices that your candidates have in their hands. Overwhelmingly Android, overwhelmingly small devices. So what does this mean for your operation? Before I get ahead of myself, right? What does this mean? The first thing we really want to make sure everybody's clear on is, hey, the fact that we have so much prepopulation is driving a lot of mobile usage, and it makes for a faster application time. And what that implies is a need on the recruiting department end for faster response time. And an example I like to use is if I send you an email and I don't get a reply back for a day, that's pretty good. And sometimes I'm guilty, admittedly, of not responding even in a day. But if I send you a text message, my expectation socially is that you're gonna respond in a few minutes, right? To a certain extent, the medium is the message. Right? As the driver pool has moved predominantly doing their job search, doing their job applications, managing their career via a mobile device, the whole cadence of the process has sped up. And you really need to think through, how are you responding to drivers in a fast way? Takeaway one. Takeaway two, if you're thinking about using a short form, a landing page, those types of things for maybe a candidate that isn't quite sure they want to commit to submitting a full application, great. But our 2 cents would be, use it in a way that we can offer, that can leverage that pre-population effect. Get it to where what we call an upgrade can be offered. If we're hosting landing pages, we're hosting short forms, we can offer a significant percentage of your candidates an experience that says, hey, we think we recognize you. Do you want to go ahead and submit a full application now? And for our clients that we're doing that for, they're seeing about a 20% bump in full applications, right? Just by having that upgrade just offered to their candidates as they go along, right? Knowing those things are out there, I think, is important. And finally, the thing to think about when you are considering making changes to your IntelliApp is think about the parts of your application that only pre-populate for a very small percentage of your eyes. In particular, the company-specific questions. The more questions you add onto your application, right, the longer it's going to take that driver to complete. Knowing that driver's on a smartphone, do you really want to ask 30 or 40 or 50 questions on your company questions page? It might make sense for your business, but you got to keep that in the back of your mind when you're deciding how to refine your IntelliApp to make sure, hey, you're aware of the device they're coming on, you're aware of how much time they're looking to spend with your application, and being respectful of that time. It's going to end up getting you better results. Okay? Okay. Let's talk about driver polls. The job of driver polls is to help remove friction out of that job search process, right? Whether it's discovering a carrier, getting through the recruiting process, getting through the onboarding process. We launched the app about 3 years ago, and we've been really, really happy with where we've gotten to in those 3 years, but we think there's lots and lots of things we can do in the future. The big thing that we're seeing is, there's about 90,000 drivers a month who are using the app. That varies a little bit from month to month, and it's growing quite a bit year over year. So obviously, part of Driver Pulse is the option to position your companies more prominently through what we call Pulse Match. But there's a big chunk of apps that are drivers are able to submit applications to your carrier independent of Pulse Match. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today as the second big data source. Inside Pulse, there's a lot of ways for drivers to submit their applications, right? Through the job section of Pulse, but also through what we call the carrier details screen. And what this graph shows is the number of applications in total that are coming out of Pulse and get delivered to carriers. What we see tons and tons of, and what this graph shows, is that it is very, very common for a driver to say, submit a job board app on Monday, and then a month from now, 2 months from now, come back and then submit an IntelliApp 60 days later, 90 days later. It's very common for a driver to go into the job section of Pulse and find carriers that they haven't heard of before and go ahead and submit those applications. And so over the last several months, you can see what this chart shows is that the Pulse platform is delivering about 20,000 applications per month. It's a little difficult to dimension it, but if you said, hey, every IntelliApp's worth $30, right? That's about $600,000 benefit that being plugged into Pulse gets you. And so the first thing there to recognize is, hey, as you're getting follow-on applications, meaning, hey, the guy did a job board app 60 days ago, and now he's doing an IntelliApp. That's a driver who maybe was on the market 2 months ago, and now the driver's thinking about getting back on the market. Make sure from an application assignment perspective that your recruiters know to look for those follow-on applications and are acting on those quickly. What we see a lot of times is driver does a follow-on, we call follow-on application through Pulse, well before he's doing any other job search activities, right? That's essentially a sneak preview to get somebody who's maybe dipping a toe in the water and act on those quickly. This chart doesn't show the breakdown, but that is the lion's share of the applications that we're delivering through Pulse, what we call follow-on applications. And the average age of those applications, meaning how many days have elapsed from the preceding application, is typically over 30 days for most carriers, meaning you see an app come through with a referral code of Pulse_app. That's essentially a free application that's just coming across your doorway, and it's probably coming across your doorway because that's a driver who's back out on the market. You got to act on those quickly. You know, in addition, I mentioned, hey, part of jobs, the job section of Pulse is the ability to position your carrier more prominently in that job section through something we call Pulse Match. We went and looked, and one of the things we always believed was that Pulse Match was going to be a more effective way to match up, hence the name, carriers and drivers. And so what this chart shows us is for the first half of this year, what percentage of those drivers got hired across the platform. So if you look, the blue bar there, that's the percentage of applications that got submitted that resulted in a hire for things that came through over Pulse Match. You know, the orange bar is the average for all clients in that same time period. And the gray line, which is graphed against the vertical axis on the right, is the percentage difference between Pulse Match and the average application source. And you can see, you know, it's a pretty dramatic story. If you just looked at it anecdotally, looked across a set of apps, it might be easy to miss the difference between a 3% and a 5% hiring rate. And that's admittedly a small difference. But if you look at the percentage overall, the percentage difference, it makes for a pretty dramatic story. We're pretty proud of what we're doing with Pulse Match, and we think we're really onto something in terms of delivering a better experience to drivers and carriers and just removing friction kind of out of that process.
We do have a question real quick. Just to, if you go back to that slide, can you kind of define what the platform means?
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's a great question. The platform, what we do is we look as part of our the Origins tool that everybody now has access to. We're able to extract out, hey, what's the average hire rate across all of our clients? And so what that means is, hey, if you average all clients together and you took all their leads together for each of those months, a little less than that ends up being the orange bar. So in January, a little less than 3% of all leads turned into hires. Again, averaged across all our clients, whereas in March, it was just a little north of 3%, but hovering right around that 3% number. And so we tried really hard, so we think it's an apples to apples comparison, that 3% versus the blue bar on Pulse, you know, somewhere between 4.5% to 5% on average.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, I think that makes sense. So you're pretty much doubling your hiring with Pulse Match, your hiring percentage. So
right.
Awesome.
You know, additionally on Pulse, and you know, the big takeaway there is, hey, make sure you're responding to those Pulse apps, those follow-on apps. We think they're really valuable. We see the clients that are super aggressive at following up on those, able to capture a really good percentage of those, and we're able to see drivers that are kind of dipping their toe in the water not continue to go forward. But in addition to that, I just encourage everybody to, knowing that there's a significant number of the market, most months, for most clients, it's about between 25 and 35% of the active drivers in the market are using Pulse that are in the job market in any given month. Make sure that your recruiting teams are being diligent about, hey, responding to Pulse messages, leveraging the sort of the quick message capability inside Express to send those standard messages to Pulse. When you're making status changes, make sure that the status percentages make sense in terms of what you're showing drivers in Pulse. And when drivers are sending over documents or you're requesting documents, you're leveraging those as well, or at least making sure that when drivers are submitting those things, your recruiters know how to engage with them via those tools. Okay. The third big area I was going to talk about today is the Xchange network. We think about an Xchange, we think about providers, former and current employers of drivers that you're trying to hire, or that you are, when you're in that role, having different request methods. And specifically here, I'm talking about the request method of network. We have a dedicated team here that works every day to try to grow that network, and depending on depending on the month, we have varying degrees of success, but over time, we've been able to grow that network to north of 3,000 companies, 3,000 carriers provide their verification data via Xchange, the Xchange network. Best as we can tell, that's probably, for most of our clients, that's about 35% of the DOT verifications that get done in a month are done via Xchange. And we're really excited by that, and we think there's some real possibilities there to help drive your efficiencies in terms of how your recruiting operations run. What this chart shows is the number of Xchange requests that are coming across our network, for the last 13, 14 months. And I've got the dotted line there as kind of a trend line to try to smooth out the kind of the busy season drop last holiday season and the big jump at the first part of the year, so you can kind of see the overall trend. Slowing down a little bit towards the end of the last year, towards the fall, sort of the same experience we're going to see this year, and really accelerating into the first part of the year. And so, the big thing here is that, with just a couple of mouse clicks, you can send those requests out. What does that mean for you as a carrier? On average, a network request completes about 40% faster than a fax request or another online request. Now there's some variation there. We provide the network, but we don't control the providers. So I know not all providers are providing lightning fast, but on average, it's 40% faster. But the other thing that gets lost in the shuffle sometimes, that as we grow the network becomes more important in terms of how you arrange your recruiting process, is the fact that to request those Xchange network verifications, it's just a couple of mouse clicks, right? So every time, we go from, it's faster to make a network request than to make a fax request. It's faster to make a network request than, frankly, to send it to an outsourcer. And so the big takeaway here is, hey, look, if you're thinking about trying to reduce the total cycle time of your recruiting process, and depending on how you are dividing the labor between your recruiting function and your processing function, a lot of our clients have that split where a pretty bright line distinction. It probably makes sense to at least think about that split. And I know there's operational details to consider, but think about that split in terms of, hey, could I have my recruiters clicking on that auto request button to get all of my network requests done, really initiated sooner? Is that a way to reduce the overall elapsed time on getting verifications completed? The numbers would suggest, yeah, for a lot of people, it really is. You know, some clients opt to outsource those verifications, outsource the whole VOE process. You know, the thing to consider there is that if you figure an average driver might say have 3 employers, and you're probably paying between $6 and $9 per employer. If you look at our numbers, and if you're hiring mostly experienced drivers, you're probably paying, you're paying $9 for somebody to click an order button and get something back. It might make sense to click that order button later in the process. Take on a third of those things in-house, and only send the things outside that aren't network fulfilled. I know that there's some arms and legs there, but people spend a lot of time and effort trying to get these verifications, and the fact that you can get a little more than a third of them done via the network, I think is really powerful. It's something that may not be totally visible in terms of how that network has grown over time. If you add in the ability of an exchange to do the to send a verification securely via an email request, we have about another 10% of our requests handled via email. And so what happens is, 45% of our requests are handled totally electronically, which provides some pretty compelling benefits. So again, everybody's got different operational realities, and we want to make sure that you are aware of, hey, look, here's the things that are out there. So when you're making decisions about how to structure your operating environment, you got all the facts at your disposal. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit to what we're seeing in the market as far as candidate application patterns. We think this is really interesting data, and if you've been to our user conference, or you may have seen something similar, we think this is was a little counterintuitive to us since we started tracking this data a year or so ago. And the data stayed really, really consistent in terms of the overall shape of the graphs. What we're looking at here is not the number of applications, but the number of applicants, the number of candidates. We see distinct candidates over time. The top kind of orange line, the one that's bouncing between 250 and 350,000 candidates a month, those are the total number of drivers we see in the market each month. The blue line is the total number of full applications that we see each month. The really remarkable thing here is that only about half, actually a little less than half of all the candidates do a full application anywhere. Remember, this is candidates, not applications, right? And so what this means is, of the people that are going to come across your door over the next 30 days, only 1 in 2 of them are going to do a full application anywhere, meaning half the people you see aren't going to go forward with anybody in the process. That makes your job harder, clearly. You got to find a way to be efficient in figuring out who the serious candidates are and who aren't, right? One of the comments I've heard from time to time is that, oh yeah, it's the same drivers in the market month after month after month. And that's what's driving a lot of the churn in the market. And while there's definitely drivers who do apply as if it were a secondary hobby, that's not what we see in the data overall. On average, what we're seeing is that these candidates tend to be in the market just a couple of times a year. Once every 6 or 8 months is what we see on average. We're seeing about 2 million drivers a year come across the platform. And so while you can revisit them, and you can get them the next time around, and you should definitely figure out how do you want to continue to develop and cultivate a relationship with those candidates. If you miss a shot, it's going to be a while before you see that driver again. The gray line down at the bottom, we look at if you take the top 5 candidate sources combined and deduped, meaning how many candidates in general, what percentage of the market are all the big places that you can go? And the answer is a really small percentage. It averages most months between 10 and 13% are combined the top 5. And so what this means is that recruiting departments have a really tough job. If you think about it, half the candidates aren't going to go to a full application with anybody. And the obvious places to reach out to candidates, right, are only going to get you 15% of the market. The other 85% of the market is only going to be reached via other channels, right? And so it is difficult to reach out to that market, but at least you know kind of what you're getting yourself into.
Some people are really curious about what the top 5 candidate sources are. So maybe we could talk a little. We can't really say.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I'm going to have to play a little coy on that. It's a totally reasonable question. There will be more to come as we sort of scrub that data and make sure that it's. We have a complete story to tell around not only what the sources are, but which sources are most effective for clients overall and what the big trends are there. So, yep. Okay. Any other questions on that one, or are we good?
We're still good.
Okay. So I mentioned this stat earlier about the conversion rate of full applications to hired rates. On average, this is what we see. For every 100 leads that an average carrier sees, that converts to about 17 applications, full applications. And those 17 full applications, on average, end up, for the last year or so, converting to about 3 hires. Okay, that's what we see across the platform. What this chart shows is we were curious about, okay, is that consistent for all different types of fleets, defined as by fleet size? And so this chart shows just the full apps and hires, right, based on fleet sizes of less than 25 trucks, 25 to 50, 50 to 100, and so on. And what you can see is that the curves vary a bit as you get deeper fleet sizes, as you get deeper into the fleet size chart over to the right. And as near as we can tell, this has as much to do with the advertising strategy that different fleets of different sizes are taking. Bluntly, if somebody's going to go if they're thinking about applying at a really large fleet, they didn't have to do a lot to discover who that fleet was, right? They're mostly just trying to find where the application is. Or if they're going to try to find Tim's Trucking or Leah's Trucking, those fleets tend to use the bigger job board sites less often, and it puts more of an onus on that driver to do some research ahead of time. They're engaging with those candidates more often, and we tend to see a higher percentage of, hey, a phone app or a phone contact before a full app happens a little bit more often. And we think that's what's driving the higher percentage of full apps as a percentage of leads. And the little bit better conversion rate. I think drivers are a little bit more intentional about being interested in picking out the smaller carrier. When they do pick out a smaller carrier, a little bit more interesting. But the overall story in terms of what happens between a lead app and a full app, it stays pretty consistent that you guys have a really tough road to climb, to track down, whatever the metaphor I'm going to mangle is, right? In terms of getting these full apps turned into hires. And the bigger your fleet, frankly, the bigger the hill is that you've got to climb, more often than not. Okay, so the guy submitted an application. How important is how responsive a carrier is? And we've looked at this data a bunch of different ways. And the data is very, very consistent. Minutes really count. Minutes really count. So what this chart shows is what is the vertical bars, the height is representing the hiring rate, right? What percentage of those candidates get hired? And the categories along the bottom represent how many minutes did it take for a recruiter to respond to that driver. Now, it is difficult, admittedly, to try to figure out exactly how fast a recruiter responded, right? So we've looked at this data a bunch of different ways, but the story, this basic shape of the curve is always the same, right? If that driver gets responded to really, really quickly, whether the metric is our IntelliApp Now platform using the marker for how fast response happens, or if we're looking at status changes, or we're looking at other things, the response rate, the higher rate, based on that faster response is significantly higher, right? We were really surprised by this data, and we kept looking at it, and we've looked at it 9 ways to Sunday, and the shape is always the same. And I think this is consonant with the amount of mobile applications that we're seeing. You know, if you think about that driver applying on his phone, you know, if you can get to him right then, he's going to be more likely to pick up the phone and answer. And if you don't get to him within 5 minutes, you know, the chances start to go down. The chances of getting a voicemail, the chance of that text message not getting replied to, the chance of that pulse message not getting replied to tends to go up. And the big thing here is when you're thinking about how are you going to arrange your recruiting department, what sort of premium do you put on response time? The data is just incontrovertible. Minutes really matter. The faster you respond, across the board, we see it in different fleet sizes, we see it different times of the day, we see it with different ways of measuring response time. The faster you get there, without exception, the faster you get there leads to a higher rate. Okay, so to that end, we've got some tools to help. Some of these are available part of the base package, some of them are add-ons, but just wanted to sort of make sure that everybody knew that they were out there. Base module of Express has the ability to send an autoresponder email to that candidate when an application is received. Right? Obviously, a canned email, it's not as good as a personalized outreach from a recruiter, but it's clearly better than nothing. There's an ability inside the platform to manage, if you're not aware of that, how to do the status change notification tool, to be able to manage, hey, from the time that driver does submit an application, sort of the stopwatch is running. The status change notification tool provides you a backstop. So if that driver gets stuck in ready for processing for more than 2 hours, you can notify the right people and get ability to that as you try to make sure that those drivers move through the process. The Reconnect tool gives you the ability to automate and the process of recontacting that driver that may say, hey, he's got a violation on his MVR, that means you can't hire him. Make sure that the day after that violation drops off or the day before, your recruiter has visibility to reach out and contact that driver, maybe get him thinking about your company again now that he meets your hiring requirements. Job Board Scrubber is a way to help convert those leads into full applications, kind of an automated outreach tool, kind of set it and forget it sort of thing. IntelliApp Now is our tool to help recruiting departments respond in real time more effectively for drivers. Real time is just qualitatively different than fast, but again, the data is really, really clear. The faster you can get to these guys, the better they are. Okay, so to kind of wrap up here, big takeaways. Hey, you're getting lots of pre-population off of your IntelliApp. That leads to lots of mobile apps. Make sure you're responding fast. Make sure you're thinking about custom questions that you're adding onto your application. Make sure that you're thinking about how you're going to be smart about how you use short applications and leverage that upgrade possibility wherever you can. Talked about Pulse, make sure you're looking for those pulse follow-on applications. Collectively, there's thousands of those flowing across the platform. Most of the time, those are drivers who are thinking about getting back in the market that you probably couldn't connect with the first time through. It's a golden opportunity, and we're seeing that number continue to rise. Get the most juice out of that as you possibly can. Yeah, Xchange Network, 1 out of 3 verifications are available with just a couple of mouse clicks. Be thinking about how to do that to reduce your total cycle time, as well as the total elapsed time of your verifications process. Make sure that guys aren't getting stuck in that verifications and you're getting guys seated into orientation as quickly as possible. Finally, we talked about what's happening in the labor market. Hey, it's really tough. We've got a lot of sympathy for it. It's just a tough job that you have to figure out sort of the wheat from the chaff, the interested candidates from the guys who are just kicking tires. But time and time again, the faster you can respond, there's huge ROI there. You guys are spending a lot of money on getting drivers into the top end of your funnel. The faster you respond, it's gonna increase your conversion rate. I really, really believe that, and want to make sure that was visible to you guys. Okay. Any questions we have time for?
Yeah, we're still waiting for some to come in. Thank you so much. That was great. That was really informative. I know we presented you guys with a lot of data and information and graphs. So if you want to, we can wait for a little bit to see if you have questions that come in. If you want to review it later and then ask questions, afterwards or as you think of them, you can go ahead and write into us at any time. Just respond to the GoToWebinar email, and that will go directly to me, or you can just write to Leah at Tenstreet.com. A few questions I've answered privately, and others that I haven't, I will reach out to you afterwards. And I'm going to go ahead, if we can go back to that last slide that shows the features or the tools that can help. So the ones that are included, this person's asking which ones are included and which ones would be additional service add-ons.
I believe the first 2 are included.
That's right.
Right? They're just a matter of setting up, and I think you can manage most of that setup without even just by your login to Express.
Yeah, you can talk to your primary or work with your account manager to get those set up. And then for the Reconnect tool and Job Board, Scrubboard, and IntelliApp now, I can send out additional information afterwards to describe what those are and what you would need to do and, who they're really meant for and how you can get them and set up. So I'll do that after the webinar. And I don't see any other questions coming in right now. Again, just feel free to ask them later if you'd like to, as you think of them throughout the day. And I want to thank everybody for their time, for carving out some time during their day. I know you guys are really busy out there, and so we really appreciate you making the time to sit with us for a little bit and let us show you some of the things that we're working on, what we do to try to help your businesses be the most successful that they can be. And with that, I will.
Thanks, guys. Hope this was helpful, and let us know if you have any other questions.
Okay, thanks so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.